sorry, you're gonna, I'm gonna have to introduce myself to you again for about the what, 20 years time since the beginning of a semester. But for those who've never seen me before, I need to do it. So, welcome. My name is Natalie Doyle, and I am acting director of the Monash European and EU Centre. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this public lecture, which is to be delivered by Mr. Stuart Gill, British Consul-General in Melbourne. The British Consul-General has been a great friend of the Centre. Over lunch we actually discussed how we can formalise, widen, deepen all those terms you want to use, which go with the European Union. Our programme of internships, because we regularly have students who actually do internships with the British Consulate. Now, you are here to listen to Stuart, who will be talking to us about the UK and EU in the Asian century, and give us the British view from down under. So there's quite a few dimensions to this talk. This talk shall be followed by question time, of course. And just to give you a little bit of information about Stuart's biography, Stuart has been Consul-General in Melbourne since July 2008 and began his career in the UK Government's Department for Trade and Industry before moving to the Foreign Commonwealth Office in 1994. And then from 1994 right up to 2002, there's quite a list of very interesting positions, but I do not want to waste too much time on those details. So I will focus on one point. It is when Stuart returned to London in 2002 after all those engagements, he became responsible, because it's directly relevant to your talk, he became responsible for transatlantic trade issues before heading up a team dealing with the EU's relations with the Americas and Asia, right? So that's a point that I wanted to make. And during the UK presidency of the EU in 2005, he chaired the EU's working group on EU-US relations at the start of George W. Bush's second term. That must have been very interesting. Very interesting times indeed. In any case, you have received the information, so you have more information on Stuart's background, and I really want to hand over right now so we can hear Stuart's contribution. I would just point out to you that this microphone has got a certain scope, so that's why you've got the portable microphone. So I would ask you to please join me in welcoming our speaker today.
Natalie, thank you very much. First of all, a sound check. Can everybody hear that? Yes, if you can't hear me, say so. Natalie, thank you very much. The danger of you listening to all those past things that I've been doing is that combined with a rather broad title to my talk now, that I could talk for about 16 hours, but I don't think that's a very good idea. And I could talk about too many things. So I'm going to try and have a bit of a focus if I can. But I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. So a little bit of background to begin with. Now, as Natalie said, I've been doing this job for about 3.5 years now. I was told a number of things before I started this job in Australia, and I'd never been to Australia before I got this job. And I was told a number of things, including that one of the many Australian creatures would eventually kill me. That's the danger of reading Bill Bryson's book on the plane coming over. I was wondering whether I'd made the right decision. I was told that Australians would mercilessly tease me as a POM, that Aussie rules football does actually have rules, and that the sun always shines in Melbourne. 3.5 years later, I have avoided deadly animals, evidently. I have, in contrast, mercilessly teased Australians about the Ashes, and given that I have such a wide subject, I'm happy to talk about that. I'm getting some applause from the front now, that's very good. I have grown to love footy, and the long drought here finished just about the day that I set foot in Melbourne. But I was told one other, more meaningful thing. I was told that the UK-Australia relationship was in good shape, but I shouldn't take it for granted. And I haven't forgotten that. And this has proved to be true. Australia is changing so much, demographically, economically, and in its geopolitical status, that I would be foolish to think that Britain's relationship with Australia would remain static. One of the things I do in my job is I get to meet a lot of the Brits here, obviously, and some of them have been here a long time. And talking to some of the British expats here, perhaps the older ones, I get a glimpse into what Australia was like 30, 40, 50 years ago. And by comparing that, because their attitudes are a little bit stuck in those times, and comparing that to what I see today in Australia gives me a very clearer view of Australia than I had when I was sitting on the aeroplane reading Mr. Bryson's book. And so the point about not taking the relationship for granted has proved to be an important lesson for me. And it's relevant to what I want to say today about Britain's place in the world, or rather Britain's role in Europe in a changing world. Now, no country can afford to take any of its relationships for granted. Diplomacy is not a zero-sum game. In the same way that Australia looks at its relationships with the US and China, described to me only this week by a former Australian Minister of Foreign Affairs, as a false choice between one or the other, but a more complicated process with a crucial security ally on the one hand and a crucial economic partner on the other. So Britain looks upon its relationship in the world, its place in the world, through a prism of myriad interconnecting relationships. But let me give you a bit of more perspective on how I see this and how I'm currently seeing it. As Natalie has explained, I spent the best part of 4 years in Australia. Prior to that, I spent 8 out of the previous 10 years either in Brussels or in the Europe Directorate of the Foreign Office. Now, in a few months, I will go back to Europe when I will be Britain's next ambassador to Iceland, a country geographically on the periphery of Europe, but poised to become one of the next 2 members of the European Union, along with Croatia, and we have the Croatian Consul-General with us today. Now, while I've been here, I've been mostly concerned with economic issues, working to increase British exports to Australia and Australian investment in the UK, but also seeking to explain what's been going on in the UK economy and the Eurozone. So what I would like to do today is to say something about Europe as I seek to reacquaint myself with it in anticipation of returning there later this year. Britain's place in Europe, Britain's place in the world, and where Britain's relationship with Australia fits in. Largely this will have an economic focus, so please don't ask me to solve the Middle East peace process, because I won't be able to do that today. Let's start, however, with a little bit about Britain's place in the world, as expressed by my boss, the Foreign Secretary, William Hague. He recently set out his vision for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCA, my home department. And I think this is as good a snapshot of Britain's place in the world as one can get. When Mr. Hague became Foreign Secretary following the general election in May 2010, he'd been opposition spokesman for foreign affairs for about 6 years. One of the first things he did was to gather the London staff of the Foreign Office in the FCA building in London. He told them that he'd got the job he wanted, that he wanted to make the Foreign Office the best foreign affairs ministry in the world, that he had not spent 6 years as opposition foreign affairs spokesman only to come in and tear it down. Now I should tell you, and I hope we're in the confines of a Chatham House protected environment here, Chatham House rules, but there were a few audible sighs of relief in the room when he said this. I don't think I'm betraying any confidences when I say that some people have begun to feel that the Foreign Office had lost some traction. Some people thought that number 10, the Prime Minister's office, had taken over the helm of foreign policy, and some thought that we were closing down too many embassies. Mr. Hague's vision was clear. He said the following: I consider it a central part of my mission as Foreign Secretary to seek a permanent and well-entrenched improvement in Britain's ability to project its influence overseas, founded on a revived and reinvigorated Foreign Office that leads thinking on foreign policy across government and that places Britain at the centre of the new networks of the 21st century. It must be a foreign office, he went on, with a clear sense of purpose, greater ambition, a stronger and in some cases expanded diplomatic network, and even deeper skills and capability. He also had a go at the previous government, the Labour government, and lamented the loss of the Foreign Office Language School, which had begun to lead to shortages in skilled speakers of Arabic, Mandarin, Afghan languages, and even French, actually. He also criticised the way that Foreign Office funding lost its protection against currency movements and how a number of our embassies had been closed. He vowed to increase our diplomatic presence in India and China by increasing the number of frontline staff in each country by 30 and 50 positions, and to expand our diplomatic strength in Brazil, Turkey, Mexico and Indonesia, Burma, Thailand, South Korea, North Korea, Mongolia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Angola, Botswana, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, the list goes on. He pledged too to maintain the strength of our delegations to the United Nations in New York and Geneva, NATO and the European Union, and to keep our network of Consulates-General across the United States. Furthermore, he said the government would not close any of the existing 140 British sovereign posts overseas, and that we would open 6 new embassies and up to 7 new Consulates-General in the emerging economies, including one in Brazil. And there are lots of other examples as well. And I know there is a debate about the coverage in DFAT overseas, but I won't go into that. So what's this all about? Is this about a cabinet minister empire building inside the British government? Well, no, it's about Britain's place in the world. Above all, it's a recognition that we're not reliant on a single relationship, or even a narrow set of relationships. Now, commentators are fond of asking the question of successive British governments whether we are US-facing or Europe-facing. You will have heard about our so-called special relationship with the US. First coined, I'm pretty sure, by Churchill, it has persisted over the decades variously as a positive assertion of where our interests really lie, and equally as a cynical sneer at our subservience to our American friends. In whichever form it is used, the consequence is that we can't really, therefore, be European. We can't face in 2 directions at once. Either we are pro-American or we are pro-Europe. We can't be both. This is a sterile debate. These are not either-or scenarios. And it comes back to William Hague's vision for the Foreign Office. It's about nurturing existing relationships and discovering the benefits of new ones. It's about complex relationships in a global world. Our membership of NATO, the EU and the Commonwealth, our permanent seat on the UN Security Council, and our rich tapestry of social ties to the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, Africa, North America and the Middle East all give us our own unique web of partnerships and connections. We have all the advantages of the English language, making it easier for us to connect and do business around the world and to be open to the ideas of others. It even helps us in Australia sometimes. We are one of the world's great homes of science, innovation, learning, culture and trade. Along with our armed forces, the strength of our diplomacy and our aid programs, these are all part of our national advantages and assets. So while maintaining our close ties with the US and the European Union, we are tapping into these other networks as never before. We are a transatlantic nation as well as a European one, but our role and interests go beyond that to be global. Now let's linger for a while in the European Union centre on our place in the EU. I always like to start with an historical context. The EU, like history itself, is a work in progress. You're all students of the EU, so I suspect I'll be covering familiar ground, but it's worth reflecting for a minute on how we got where we are today. Let me say a little bit about my own time in Brussels as part of that context. Now, Brussels is a great city, and if you've never been there, I thoroughly recommend it. It's rich in history, heritage and culture. It's one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Sit at any restaurant and eavesdrop for a minute and you will hear myriad accents and languages and international conversations galore. It may be the European centre, but it's where the world meets too. Now, I spent 4 happy years in Brussels, but I don't mind admitting that there were times when I wondered what I was doing there. The Brussels machine is characterised by many things, some of them none too flattering. But one that sticks in my mind is its ability to hold long and tedious meetings, many of them deep into the night. I have memories of sitting in rooms with 26 other member state delegates, the European Commission, the Council Secretariat, the Presidency delegation, interpreters, and building staff who would deliver the world's worst coffee, believe me. Ironic in Brussels. Sitting through this at 2 AM discussing the 14th draft of the Bus Manufacturer Harmonisation Directive is not always my idea of fun. I especially remember a particularly late night when the Italian delegate was speaking, and I do apologise if there are Italians in the room, but what comes next is by way of illustration, not condemnation. And I was listening to the English interpretation through my headphones when the interpreter stopped interpreting while the Italian continued to talk. After a while, those of us listening to the English interpretation turned to the English interpreter in her booth with quizzical looks on our faces. Spotting the anxiety among us, she took the microphone again and said for our benefit, "I'm still waiting for the verb, I'm sorry." This brought a little laughter to an otherwise testing and testy meeting. It didn't delay the whole pain of the meeting, and we pressed on doggedly to the end, concluding that we would resume later that day on the 15th draft. Now, there is a serious point about this. Despite the tedium, the detail, and the late nights, this is the way European countries do business with each other now. They thrash out agreements and put aside their differences. It might take 15 drafts, but I'd rather be part of an organisation that agreed on the 15th draft and gave up on the first. And it's not so many years ago that some of the member states were shooting at each other. That's not how we resolve our differences anymore. And not so long ago, many of our members were stuck behind an iron curtain with no freedom and scant chance of prosperity. That's the historical context. I was discussing with Natalie in advance, and she, I think, dared me to mention the peace historical context within the first 5 minutes, but I think I've actually gone beyond 5 minutes. Because I know it's a familiar theme. Look, the EU exists because Europe's history is not a happy one. In the last few centuries, we've spent too much time fighting each other. But now we can look back on close on 70 years of uninterrupted peace. There's the peace word, and it took me 20 minutes, I think. We shouldn't take this for granted, and should see the EU in this light. The EU, with its origins in the European coal and steel community many years ago, is predicated on forging agreements, and I think that gets forgotten. It doesn't always look like that, and to be honest, it doesn't always achieve it. But its member states recognise that the EU is at its strongest when they all agree. And that's why we sit around at 2 AM thrashing out the drafts. I know from my own experience of 4 years in Brussels, which I hadn't realised the day I arrived in Brussels, that everything is predicated to getting an agreement. That's how it's set up, and it's a valuable thing that we forget. Now, my next sentence here says, but what do we, the UK, really think of the EU? And I think that may be a dangerous question, but let's see where this goes. Now look, we've been accused of being ambivalent about Europe. We're part of it, but we don't really belong in it. Late arrivals to the European Party, we see ourselves as separate, both geographically and psychologically. I can't deny that we have shown traces of the Little Englander. They surface in some of our tabloid newspapers, sometimes in offensively xenophobic language, and it's not something I, as a Briton, can be very proud about. The view is we don't like straight bananas and don't like being told by Brussels that we have to have them. We don't like being told that our chocolate isn't really chocolate. And we don't like all that metric measurement stuff. In short, we don't like being told what to do by foreigners. As the joke has it, in a fictional weather report, fog in English Channel, continent cut off. At least this is the impression that you might have if you read some of our newspapers. But as ever, the reality is different. Even during the Thatcherite years, when our European policy was caricatured as Mrs. Thatcher wielding her handbag, obstructing all progress in Europe, we were helping to shape the future of Europe. It was Mrs. Thatcher's government who drove the creation of the single market, opening up Europe as a market of then 320 million people and now more than 500 million people. It was Mrs. Thatcher who signed the Single European Act for Britain, putting the single market in place. She fought hard for British interests, and in so doing she helped shape the future of Europe, stemming the flow of enthusiasm for a federal Europe and reasserting the vision of Europe as a community of sovereign states and not a super-state. Britain has always argued for a bigger EU. Enlargement is, and always has been, a key plank of our EU policy. The last major enlargement of the EU in 2004 brought in 10 countries, most of them from the former Eastern European bloc. What an extraordinary time that was. The Berlin Wall had been torn down barely 15 years earlier. The peoples of East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and the Baltic states shared the values and aspirations of their Western neighbours and demanded the same democratic and political freedoms. Tearing down the Berlin Wall was only part of the story. The rest was about those countries aspiring to and meeting the standards of the rule of law and human rights, things that they had been denied for most of the 20th century. Membership of the EU was an extraordinary incentive for those countries to transform almost everything about themselves, their society, their culture, their economy, their external relations. Enlargement remains a major part of the EU agenda and of Britain's agenda in the EU. We've got 8 more countries in line to join, and Britain supports their ambitions. We are unequivocal in our support for all the countries who are in line to join. For us, it is a vital strategic goal. Shared security and prosperity built on a firm foundation of democracy and the rule of law. We want to see the Western Balkans back in Europe, extending stability and success to a part of the world where conflict is still an all too recent memory. The British government believes it would be a profound mistake to let the momentum of enlargement stall in a changing world whose economic and political weight is swinging eastwards. The European Union will remain strong only if it is outward-looking and continues to grow. That's why we in Britain are strong supporters of the EU neighbourhood policy and believe that membership of the EU should be open for any European country that wants to join and can meet the rigorous accession criteria. Of those 8 countries standing in the wings, Croatia and Iceland are well on track to be the next ones to join, and the UK looks forward to welcoming them as member states in the near future. Indeed, I hope it will be one of the pleasures of my next job in Reykjavik to be there when Iceland becomes a member. The British vision is of a dynamic, outward-looking Europe. Some say that we should pause after Croatia and that we only want the EU to be enlarged so that it becomes unwieldy and impossible to function. These are false propositions which the British government rejects. A bold enlargement programme plays to Europe's strengths through the entrenchment of stability and democracy, the single market, the free movement of workers, the collective approach towards developing a low-carbon economy. These great successes of the European Union are founded upon the principle that together the countries of Europe are greater than the sum of our parts. The British government believes that principle still stands. Of course, the workings of the European Union can be improved, and we are determined to be actively engaged in doing so. But halting the momentum of enlargement is absolutely not the solution to Europe's problems, and neither would it help with our neighbourhood policy. With enlargement comes a greater responsibility in our neighbourhood, which now stretches a very long way from London. The intervention in Libya, for example, is a powerful example of where Europe showed its international standing. We're stronger together and can exert real influence. Most recently, the EU has been leading the charge on Iran with a twin-track approach of pressure and engagement. It's exactly this type of unity and solidarity that we should bring to bear when dealing with international challenges, using the combined effort of the EU and working closely with member states to achieve our objectives. Now, I mentioned the single market once or twice. This is part of the bedrock on which the EU is now founded. A market of 500 million people is a phenomenal economic power. And for the UK, it brings major benefits. It adds 600 billion euro a year to our economy. 7 out of our top 10 trading partners are European. We are the EU's gateway for global investors. 26% of non-EU companies have their headquarters in the UK. UK foreign direct investment is £482 billion with the EU, while the EU figure is £351 billion worth of investment in the UK. But we're not complacent about the EU's economic place in the world. If current trends continue, by the middle of the century, leading EU nations could fall out of the world's top 10 most powerful economies. The EU will need to reform, which comes in a number of guises. We need to ensure that the EU continues to have a strong global financial services centre. Yes, we think that means London, but London's strength is the EU's resilience, especially in light of the lessons of 2008. The emphasis in the EU must be on economic growth, based on 4 principles. Extending the single market, promoting free trade, reducing red tape, and encouraging innovation. These are all fundamentally British aims, which are shared by the European Commission, I think, and other member states. Now, I hear you mutter, what about the Eurozone? There are 2 aspects of the Eurozone that I want to consider. First, what does the current crisis say about the UK's position in Europe? And second, what do we think should happen? Now, an obvious statement to begin with, the UK is not part of the Eurozone. I'm sure to you as students of the EU that's obvious, but I do find it needs to be repeated in some circles. We never have been, and we have no plans to be members of the Eurozone, but we have a major stake in its success. We have no interest in seeing the collapse of the euro. The single currency wasn't for us. We had a long and difficult internal debate about our joining, but we decided that it would not be in our national interest to be part of it. What we are seeing today in the Eurozone is an illustration of why single currencies are difficult. It's not that they can't work, they've had one in the US. The US has a single currency across a vast, diverse continent. And Scotland came into a currency union with England in 1707. They're thinking about leaving it now, but for the time being, it's there. To work, single currencies need certain features. A central bank that can stand behind the currency and the financial system, the deepest possible economic integration, a system of fiscal transfers and collective debt issuance to deal with tensions and imbalances. The Eurozone doesn't really have any of these at the moment, so when imbalances arise and are sustained over long periods, it can lead to serious problems. It's all very difficult. That's why the UK didn't join the Eurozone. But we have every interest in its success. After all, the EU takes 42% of our exports. The current troubles in the Eurozone, though mostly off the front pages for the time being, although I see they're creeping back, show clearly the difficult times that Europe is experiencing. We think the EU will grow by about 0.6% this year, while China grows at 8% and India at 7%. In more than half the EU states, a fifth of young people are out of work. The global financial crisis showed that we could not go on forever borrowing money from hard-working Chinese savers to buy the things that Chinese workers were making for us. The current Eurozone woes are having a chilling effect on market confidence around the world. It's not just a European backyard event. So what's Europe doing about it? Well, actually, contrary to some people's conceptions, the EU has made a lot of progress. The European Central Bank has provided extensive support to European banks. Many Eurozone countries are taking painful steps to address their deficits. In some countries, so painful are these steps that the political system itself is under strain. We've seen agreement to set up a firewall, though it needs more resources, and agreement to give up more sovereignty in a fiscal compact. But there is still more to do to win the confidence of sceptical global markets. The Eurozone must end uncertainty in Greece and recapitalise Europe's banks. Meanwhile, outside the Eurozone, Britain is tackling its biggest deficit since the Second World War. It's painful, but when our new coalition government came into power in May 2010, they looked at the books and they found that we were paying something like £125 million a day in interest. Now, this is unsustainable, so we've had to embark on a difficult programme of public expenditure cuts. It has been hard, and the road to full recovery is long, but we are moving in the right direction. Our borrowing costs are the lowest they have been in a generation, only a third of what Italy has to pay. Sorry, Italy again. And our highly competitive pound is producing a significant improvement in our trade balance. Our exports to China were up 30% last year, and actually to Australia up 32%. Which brings us neatly to Australia, the gateway to Asia. The UK and the EU need to be outward looking, and they both need to look to Asia actively to seek new markets. Now, I know that you'll be covering the EU's relationship with the region in Andrea's section next, so I won't dwell on that. But the depth of the UK-Australia relationship is illustrative of the scope of our and your, Australia's, global reach. I'll try not to make this a statistics festival, but let's look at some of the facts. The UK is Australia's second largest trade services partner and also fifth largest two-way trading partner. We are the second largest foreign investor in Australia, and the UK was the second most popular destination for foreign direct investment stock and total Australian foreign direct investment for 2010, behind the USA. More than 2,500 companies from the UK and Australia do business in each other's countries every day. UK goods exports to Australia increased 32% year on year from January to November 2011. In the year to April 2011, Australia was the 9th largest investor in terms of projects, continuing its long-standing presence among the UK's top 10 investors. Now, sorry for all those trade stats, but the William Hague vision we started with at the beginning is consistent with this. As we have seen, he views British diplomacy, including what we call commercial diplomacy, to be a worldwide activity, forging relationships in as wide an arc as possible. And Australia is a key component of this for us. Our two countries have incredibly close ties, be it through history, our legal systems, our democratic values, our common love of sport, and our cultural ties. And we keep visiting each other. Apart from the 1 million British passport holders who live here, nearly 2 million of our citizens visit each other's countries every year. But I mustn't forget what I said at the beginning about not taking our relationship for granted. I'm embarrassed to say that until Mr. Hague visited Australia in January last year, no British Foreign Secretary had set foot in Australia for nearly 20 years. He's now been twice, and our Prime Minister came last year. I think in all we've seen a dozen or so British ministers in Australia in the last year and a half, so we've upped our game with our bilateral relationship with Australia. For us, it's more important than ever in this Asian century that we deepen still further our relationship in Australia. I talked about commercial diplomacy a moment ago. One arm of that is what we are doing in Australia on the Chinese front. Now, the commercial work that we do in support of British companies exporting to Australia is one aspect of our commercial goal. But given the relationship that Australia has with China, we're now working with Chinese companies who are based in Australia, putting them together with UK companies as truly putting in place Australia as a gateway to Asia. And when you consider at the moment that we export, for all sorts of reasons, more to Ireland than we do to China, that's why we're looking this far on this side of the world at other ways that we can help our companies. Just as Australia understands the Asia-Pacific region and the emerging powers, so we have a leading role in foreign policy discussions in the EU. So it's important that we continue to talk to each other because we understand, if you like, each other's hemispheres. Foreign policy is not just about happy bilateral relations, as we've seen. It's about constructing consensus on the big global issues that require big global responses. Without this, it won't be possible to solve the big issues like international terrorism, the proliferation of nuclear material, cyber security, energy security, and climate change. It simply cannot be done in a loose set of bilateral relations. This has to be done in a complex network, and Britain sees its place in the world to be part of those. So let's not take anything for granted. Let's not rely on a few chosen relationships. Some are special, some are deep, and some are difficult, but they all count. We are both, the UK is both European and transatlantic. We are not one or the other. We have strong influence as an EU member in our own neighbourhood. We have major economic and commercial interests way beyond this, as we have seen, certainly here in Australia, which gives us a big stake in regional stability, including in North Korea, Burma, and elsewhere. This is why we have a vision of global reach. My view, as a Brit down under, to revert to the title, is that we've got it about right, but we need to work hard to ensure we get the right results. And as I was told at the beginning of my stay here, never take any relationship for granted. Now I'll draw it to a close now, and I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you very much.
I'd like to open the floor for questions. Now, the Consul-General did agree with me before that he was willing to answer all questions about the United Kingdom, of course, but except the Middle East process. So I invite you to come up with all those questions. Some of them are obviously related to what you just said, but if you also have other questions which are to do with the UK about issues you've encountered in other contexts, you're welcome to put them. So I'd like to open the floor. Would anybody be brave enough to start with the translation? Yes? You can, please.
I actually have a question about Scotland and the roadway sort of situation. You said that the UK remained quite strong, like economically, financially, especially in the eyes of the EU in the current crisis. Do you think that if Scotland did break away, do you think that that sort of perception and strength would diminish a little bit?
It's a very good question, and I'm not sure anybody at the moment yet knows the answer to that. I understand the political reasons why the Scots want to do what they want to do. I think the question is less about whether the remainder of the UK would be as strong as I think it would. The question is sort of twofold. After that is, would Scotland be strong enough in a rather volatile global situation, particularly now, and also in a volatile Eurozone situation, although what they would do with their currency is not resolved. And the second question is, would the UK as a whole actually be a bit weaker? It kind of goes to your question. And I think there is a worry about that. Scotland has lots of resources, they have lots of skilled people. I'm not sure what the figures are, but I think most Scots actually live in England and other parts of the UK than in Scotland. There's maybe even a few in the room here, I don't know. So there is certainly a concern about that, and I think I'd worry more about Scotland than the rest of the UK. Yes?
On the news this morning, there's Brazil, which has overtaken the UK as the sixth largest economy in the world. The issue for me is, given what is happening in the UK in terms of its economy, and the perceived increase in nationalism and racism in the UK, what does that mean for its role, its links into Europe?
That's a Interesting question. I'm not sure where it's going, so I'll take it where I want it to go. Yes, indeed, we've been overtaken by Brazil. I hadn't seen it in today's papers, but I'd seen the statistics coming through. Let me put a positive spin on it, and I'm trying hard not to be a government spokesman or a politician, but you're talking us being overtaken as the 6th largest economy in the world. Well, I suspect, if you say that publicly, some people think, wow, were we the 6th biggest economy in the world? I had no idea, because the perception of the UK at the moment is that we've gone down the drain, and that we don't make anything. We rely on our London financial services and nothing else, and there's really not much left. But let's just explore that a bit. Let's look at financial services in the context of the global financial crisis. Before that crisis, London accounted for 31% of global financial services. After the financial crisis, London accounts for 31% of global financial services. So it's a pretty resilient part of the British economy. But it's a fallacy to say that after that there's nothing left and we don't make anything. Sure, we're no longer in the mass-produced smokestack type industries. We went through all that in the 1980s and 90s under the Thatcher government and other governments. But we have the biggest aerospace industry in Europe, the second biggest in the world. We have the biggest pharmaceutical industry in Europe, the second biggest in the world. We have the largest R&D presence in the UK. We have 4 of the top 10 universities in the world, all in the UK. Now, I'm sorry, I'm giving you a bit of a commercial, but it goes to what you're saying about our position in the world. However, dropping one place in the hit parade, does that mean we're going to loosen our influence in the rest of Europe? Well, I don't see that. I don't see that as a premise, because I don't see that as directly affecting that. Your point about increased perception of racism, that's rather concerning, and it's not something that's come across my radar. Perhaps I'm 12,000 miles away and I'm not seeing it so well. Maybe I'm reading the wrong newspapers. I don't want to deny that's a problem. You know, we have our issues, we have immigration issues. And there were some other statistics that came out just the other day about the impact on Britain's ethnicity makeup and multiculturalism throughout the last previous government we had, and consequences of uncontrolled numbers and so forth. But I'm not seeing a negative impact. I mean, I'm happy if you want to develop that argument still further.
For me, I think the issue is the UK becoming more insular? Is it becoming more isolated? And I think the issue comes back to the special relationship with the state, which is disappearing before our eyes.
I see where you're going, yeah. Look, I mean, I come back facetiously to say it depends on what newspapers one reads. And I think I made a remark somewhere in here about we do show Little Englander tendencies. And I regret that. And I think that those are usually sensationalist reporting. And that we are a multicultural nation. And we have our hotspots. And we had our riots last English summer. I don't think they had anything to do with race, but people tried to attach that to it. It was something a bit more complex, or possibly even a bit more simple than that. Are we more isolated? I think we have always suffered from this, fogging channel, continent cut off thing. That we are somewhat above the rest of the people in Europe. We are separated, and we don't want to be told what to do by those faceless bureaucrats in Brussels. And as ever with bigoted opinions, it's born from ignorance. And I think once you start explaining to people how it really works, then you can start to sort of cut down that isolation. I personally get very irritated by that kind of insularity that you talked about. It was shown at its worst during our debate on whether we should join the euro. Now, there were 2 levels of debate. One was quite a sensible one, which was, is it right for an economy like ours, which at the time had interest rates on average at least 3 percentage points above everybody else's in Europe, suddenly to join a single currency and have massive disruptions to our currency, consequences of unemployment, da-di-da-di-da. Proper economic debate, whether you agree with them or not. And then the other debate, which took place in the Daily Express and the Daily Mail, at the level of something like, will we still have the picture of the Queen on the euro coins? Unfortunately, that latter debate prevailed and politics got in the way. Sorry.
Any more questions? Yes.
You mentioned the William Hague policy of moving away from the EU and US towards Asia. And I'm looking at Africa and seeing that 60% of the fastest growing economies are based in Africa at the moment. Let's see, Brazil, for example, in South America, that's, as was mentioned, has overtaken the US, the UK in terms of GDP. So I'm wondering the future UK policy of commercial diplomacy, as you mentioned, is there a bigger focus on Africa in terms of trade and so on, and also other emerging areas like South America?
Yeah. I mean, I take slight issue with your terminology. When William Hague talked about his vision of relationships, it wasn't a question of turning away from the EU. It was expanding our existing ones. Look, I have to confess, I'm not a great Africa expert. I haven't done any of those particular positions. But we are opening more diplomatic posts in Africa, and we do recognise what is happening in Africa commercially. We recognise, for example, what China are doing in Africa. I heard the other day there are something like 1 million Chinese registered across Africa. Now that's just the registered ones. There may be 2 or 3 million Chinese. So they are seeing clearly the opportunity, the commercial opportunities in resources. One of the additional sets of relationships we're building up is with the Commonwealth. We are exploiting those for our African purposes as well. I think you make a very good point. I guess there is a question about how much we can do, because we have Africa, we have Latin America, we have Asia, we have China. There's a question of priorities as well, but we certainly do recognise that. Yes.
Any more questions?
I just want to ask a question about commercial diplomacy on the ground in Australia. What kind of activities and programs are in place to enable that?
Okay, thank you. I recognise your accent. Yes. We have 5 diplomatic presences in Australia. We have a High Commission in Canberra. We have the Consulate-General that I run here in Melbourne. We have a larger one in Sydney and 2 smaller ones in Perth and Brisbane. Outside of Canberra, most of the staff in those Consulates-General work for a body called UK Trade and Investment. This is a joint government department of the Foreign Office, my home department, and the Business, Innovation and Skills department. And its staff spend their time working with British companies who want to export here, and they will give them services, many of which we charge for. So these are chargeable services that companies get from us. There may be market analysis reports, they may be setting up programs of meetings with prospective buyers and partners and so forth. And the other bit of UK trade and investment are working with Australian companies who want to set up and invest in the UK. And that's essentially, that's the mechanism through which we do it. And we call it commercial diplomacy because we are a government body and because we are using our diplomatic connections, diplomatic relationships, and using our visiting politicians to make the best of those commercial relationships. I hope that goes. There's a much longer answer, but I hope that helps. Yes.
I'm not sure whether it's a question to you or to the next speaker. Could you possibly briefly explain what the links between national embassies and the delegation? Who is responsible for what? We have a problem with speakers coming when we ask them to deliver some certificates they don't know.
The question is about the relationship between national embassies and consulates and the EU delegation, and who you should come to first if you're looking for speakers. You should always come to the national delegations first. No, I mean, look, I don't think I could answer that. But I mean, look, I will ask Andrea to explain that. But we have, I'm part of the British Diplomatic Service, but we now have something called the European External Action Service Yeah, and you know, we are closely related with each other for obvious reasons. But what you have to understand about European foreign policy, the common foreign and security policy, is that we have a common policy, and do stop me if you're getting wrong, we have a common policy when we agree. And that means when all the member states agree. Now for some member states, like my own, the UK, we attach huge importance to maintaining for our own competence, our own decision-making ability on foreign policy. Now that doesn't mean to say that we don't have a discussion with other member states. We're very, very closely integrated into those discussions, and most of the time we are part of a common foreign and security policy that we have helped develop and then helped to deliver. You know, and that may be to do with Libya or Iran or Syria or whatever. So it does work. I have probably not answered your question about who to go to first, but I mean, if you're inviting speakers on purely foreign policy, one might argue you should go to Andrea first, but equally, why not get a view from national member consulates and embassies on their view of foreign policy? As a classic diplomatic, on one hand this, on the other hand that, but I don't know whether you wanted to contribute, Andrea, or whether you're...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, I guess it depends what you want to, I mean, what kind of information, what is behind your request. I didn't understand. I mean, if you give an example, maybe it would be easier.
So, for example, in the areas in which you agree, like when there is foreign policy, is there any cooperation on the ground in a foreign country between embassies?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Is there, for example, development aid administered by one or all of them? Is there, what kind of cooperation is there between national embassies and the EU delegation?
Okay, first of all, we have, I mean, following the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, which was the last constitutional change within the EU, the European Union delegation represents the EU, as Stuart said, in terms of common foreign security policy, which means something which was previously done by the rotating presidency, which changed every 6 months. The rotating presidency has no longer any role to play. It is the EU delegation who speaks on behalf and represents the EU. We have in the capital monthly meetings with EU ambassadors from all member states, which we chair. We have meetings of economic and commercial councillors. We have meetings of press and culture information councillors. So we have meetings. We are constantly talking to each other and exchanging views. But when it is about, for example, engaging with Australia to get the support of Australia for voting rights in the UN, which is something which was, I mean, we had to deal last year. It was the EU delegation who went and met with officials from the Australian authorities, and was not, you know, a number of individual embassies. Another important feature, I think, of our sort of authority is in the area of trade policy. It is true that member states are still fully competent on commercial promotion or assisting their companies, etc. But when it is about negotiating a free trade agreement, when it is about talking about WTO negotiations, the Doha round, very clearly it is the European Commission and therefore the EU delegation which is in the leading role in talking to government over there. But of course we do that, we do consult before and we report back to member states, so it is a constant coordination, I would say. But at least with the latest change, we have streamlined this, because we have now a one-stop shop which is there, which is permanent, and we have a high representative for foreign policy, Baroness Ashton, who is also there, sort of not changing every 6 months as it used to be the case.
Your question was the modern rendition of the one that Henry Kissinger asked all those years ago. What's the phone number of Europe?
Yes. We had, in a sense, a very very interesting illustration because we had a smooth transition from one speaker to the next. But however, I did not introduce you formally, which I wish to do now. So let's thank our first speaker and then